Hello to everyone out there. This is Dan from World Astrology Report. Hello to everyone in the chat. Today we are going live to talk about 3I Atlas, this strange interstellar object that is currently hurtling through the solar system at about 130,000 miles per hour. And there's no doubt at all that these are strange times that we're living through. I don't know about you, but I've detected a certain end of the world eschatological feeling in the air at the moment. You know, I've just clipped some YouTube videos that I saw having a scroll recently. You know, we have titles like "Everyone is going to be wiped out." We need to start preparing. Civilization as we know it is over. World War III has started. Now, you might say, well, these are sensationalist YouTube videos. They're just trying to drum up clicks and so forth. And of course, that is probably partly true. But I think there's something more going on than that. I really do think there's a lot of anxiety in the air at the moment about various kinds of catastrophes, whether it's war, whether it's things like the pole shift, or now we have 3I Atlas, this strange object, which mainstream scientists don't seem too worried about, but there are other ideas about it which are much more dramatic and some of them concerning. Now, 3I Atlas was discovered on the 1st of July by the Atlas telescope in Chile. This is where we get the name 3I Atlas from. Atlas refers to that telescope. I means interstellar, and 3 means this is the third such interstellar object ever detected. And you can see here some of the first photographs that were taken of this object. Now, in this presentation, we're going to be trying to sail between Scylla and Charybdis, two great monsters. One of them, let's say Scylla, is the monster of kind of close-minded, materialistic, conservative, scientific attitudes that you see a lot today. You know, nothing new, nothing strange is really ever possible. There's always a very mundane explanation for everything, and so on and so forth. And Charybdis is believing almost anything. Right? There are a lot of crazy narratives doing the round right now about 3I Atlas and many other things. And we don't really want to fall into the trap of just believing the craziest narrative because it's appealing to us or because it's exciting. So I'm going to be trying to sail between these two monsters and not go too far in either direction. I think that's the right way to go in these kinds of situations. Part of the problem that we have right now, particularly when it comes to this particular subject, 3I Atlas, is that there are tons of AI slop channels, let's call them. These are AI-generated channels that are, as far as I can tell, the scripts are AI-generated, the narration is AI-generated, probably even the visuals, and they are coming up with really fantastical narratives, particularly about 3I Atlas, but other things as well. These channels have proliferated a lot in the last few months. They're crossing the boundaries between sort of science fiction and spirituality, but often what they say doesn't really make sense. And generally you can kind of tell these channels because they tend to have AI narration, which is still fairly easy to detect. But there are some narratives out there that are being circulated by these channels that I don't really believe myself, and I think caution is definitely advised on YouTube, particularly at the moment when there's so much of this nonsense doing the rounds. Now, I do want to stop here and recommend some channels that I've been following on this subject, which I think are reliable and interesting. The first of them is Anton Petrov's channel. Anton is a kind of astrophysicist. His channel is really about astronomy, astrophysics, and so forth. And it's a level-headed, perhaps even conservative approach to these issues. He's going to tell you what are the scientists saying, and I think it's worth paying attention to these kinds of channels, to keep ourselves grounded a bit. We don't have to, again, take this kind of narrative as the truth, because we know that science, as it currently stands, is very conservative about a lot of the things that I think a lot of viewers certainly believe in, and I do, on this channel, in astrology and some of the woo stuff that we get into. As far as this narrative's concerned, these things aren't real, but I think it's worth paying attention to what they're saying and trying to keep it at least a bit grounded and 1 foot on solid ground. So Anton Petrov is quite reliable in this regard. Stefan Burns, friend of mine, has been on this channel before. I've been on his channel. Stefan is what I would call a spiritual scientist. He has a scientific training. He's also a very spiritual person, so he's very open-minded, but he does keep his feet on the ground as well, in terms of the actual science and so forth. So I think Stefan's channel is excellent for this, and I'm sure most of you are aware, because his channel's blowing up right now, and deservedly so. And the third one is the Angry Astronaut, another channel which has been focused heavily on 3i Atlas lately. I find this channel interesting. It does a very good job of presenting, say, the Avi Loeb perspective on 3i Atlas. Again, that's not the only perspective, it's a perspective, but it's interesting. He keeps up with what's going on and is very open to weirder possibilities. So those are 3 channels I'm paying attention to, and if you're not aware of them, you might want to check them out. Now, let's put 3i Atlas a bit in context. As I mentioned before, 3i Atlas is the 3rd interstellar object that's been detected moving through our solar system. So the first of them was Oumuamua in 2017. The name comes from Hawaiian language. I think it means the first scout to arrive, something of that kind. Quite a cool, almost poetic name there for this pretty strange object that entered the solar system in 2017. It was detected there, and there were a lot of odd things about Oumuamua, which we'll get into in a little bit. The second interstellar object was detected in 2019. It's called 2I Borisov. Borisov is the name of the astronomer who identified it. 2I Borisov, not much is said about 2I Borisov because it really did display most of the normal characteristics of a comet. It wasn't really very different, if at all, to the kind of comets that we tend to see in the solar system, so nobody's too interested in poor old 2I Borisov. And then, of course, we have 3I Atlas this year. Let's talk a little bit about Oumuamua. Oumuamua, again, first interstellar object detected in the solar system, and there were some odd things about Oumuamua. One of them being its shape, which has been inferred to maybe be kind of like long and pointy, like this, sort of almost cylindrical or pancake-shaped, but definitely a really odd shape for an object and not the kind of shape that we tend to see comets. And there was something else really strange about Oumuamua, which is that it seems to accelerate as it left the solar system. Now, comets can accelerate. Often what happens is the sun heats these comets up, and they do something called outgassing. Basically, gas gets emitted from the comet, and it basically serves as a kind of type of propulsion and slightly causes it to accelerate. But there was nothing like that detected on Oumuamua. They weren't able to put down the way that it accelerated to outgassing. So there were these question marks over like why it did that. And most of the scientists at the time were a bit puzzled by it. And here enter Avi Loeb. We have to talk quite a bit about Avi Loeb in this story. Avi Loeb, who is here on the right, kind of became famous in 2017 because he was quite outspoken about Oumuamua, and he was raising the possibility that it was a piece of technology of some kind. And he had all sorts of reasons for saying that, including the fact that it accelerated. I think he was speculating that it might have been some kind of solar sail, which was using power from the sun somehow. And this really made his name. Avi Loeb is a professor of astronomy at Harvard University. That's what's interesting about him. He's a very well-known and senior academic, somebody with a good reputation, or at least certainly before he started talking about aliens all the time. So it's kind of unusual to see a mainstream scientist talk in this way about astronomy, because that's very rare, right? The general assumption tends to be that nothing too strange really happens in the cosmos, at least nothing to do with aliens. So Avi Loeb comes on the scene in 2017, makes a lot of noise about how Oumuamua might be an alien probe. Now, let's have a quick look at the trajectory of 3I Atlas. This is an animation that I've found. You can see it's coming into the solar system, and today it's making its flyby of Mars, October the 3rd. It's going to pass Venus quite closely, and then in spring of next year, it's also going to fly by Jupiter. And this has been seen as pretty strange, or at least Avi Loeb certainly believes it's strange, because this object has basically come into the solar system parallel to the ecliptic plane. It could, remember, come in at basically any angle. It doesn't have to be following the plane of the solar system. But 3I Atlas is pretty close to that plane, and it's also making a pretty close flyby of 3 planets. Now, Avi Loeb has come out saying, well, the chances of this are really low. It's the kind of thing that you might do, say, if you were trying to investigate what was in the solar system and you knew there were planets there. Perhaps you would design this trajectory so that it took you past 3 of the planets in the way that it does. So he is arguing that this is strange, and I think that argument has some merit, right? It is seemingly quite coincidental that it's flying quite close to these planets in this way, and supposedly there's a very, very low chance of a trajectory like this coming about by chance. Now, first of all, as well, let's have a quick look at the timeline for 3I Atlas, just so we know where we are in its story. On July the 1st of this year, it was discovered. In late September, so already past, of course, it became no longer visible because it was too close to the sun. And when I say no longer visible, I mean no longer visible from Earth. Now, today, it's making its closest Mars flyby. It's getting pretty close to Mars, actually. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. On October the 29th, it's going to make its perihelion, right? This is its closest approach to the sun. We're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. And then in late November, it's going to become visible from the Earth again as it moves out from the beams of the sun. And on March the 16th of 2026, it's going to make its closest Jupiter flyby. Now, besides this trajectory, there are quite a few weird things about 3I Atlas. Avi Loeb has highlighted a lot of them, and even your most kind of mainstream conservative scientists are agreeing it certainly is weird, meaning it's not like ordinary comets, even though the mainstream scientific line is it is a comet, but there are certainly odd things about it. It's not behaved in the same way. There are strange characteristics. One of them is that it has had a tail facing the sun. Generally, comets have tails that face away from the sun, but 3i Atlas has this kind of anti-tail, which is unusual. The chemical composition of it is also very strange. By analyzing the frequencies of the light that's coming off the object, scientists are able to have an idea of what chemicals are making it up. And in the case of 3i Atlas, what they're seeing doesn't really match the pattern that you normally see with comets. It seems to be shedding a lot of nickel, for example, but without iron, which is something that doesn't happen normally when they observe comets. So there's certainly odd things about it. And Avi Loeb is picking up on these and saying, well, does this mean it could be a piece of alien technology? Another argument could be just simply, well, this is an object from a very different part of the universe, so why would we expect it to be the same as what we have in this solar system? So that's like a more conservative perspective. But whatever way you look at it, there's a weird object that has entered our domain, if you like, and is hurtling through it at rapid speed. Now, we can cast a chart for 3i Atlas, just as we can cast a chart for pretty much anything that comes into being or enters human consciousness in some way. So what I've done here is I've cast a chart for the moment of discovery of 3i Atlas, which happened on the 1st of July this year, 5:15 a.m., and I've used the location Samo Alto. It was the closest place I could find in Chile. Now, I don't want to try and do a deep reading of this chart because I'm kind of skeptical that that's valuable, given that this is such a strange object, and there are traditional rules for interpreting comets, but those rules were developed for comets that appear in the sky and can be seen with the naked eye. This object's nothing like that. It was first seen by a radio telescope. It comes from interstellar space, not our solar system. So I'm a little bit hesitant, and I haven't studied comet interpretation in depth myself either. But what I will point out is that we have the sign of Gemini rising here, 6 degrees. You can see it says AS, 6 degrees of Gemini. Gemini is the sign of Mercury, the messenger. So the planet in this chart that's representing this object is Mercury, the messenger, which I think is very fitting. Mercury is in the sign of Leo. It's a very singular kind of object, something very unusual that has captured a lot of attention. And Mercury is making quite a close opposition to Pluto, which might suggest that there's an element of knowledge emerging from the depths here, or from the unknown, perhaps. We might also wonder about themes of obsession or control or manipulation around ideas here as well, if you wanted to take it a little bit further. Now, something interesting happened to 3i Atlas recently, and it happened on the 7th of September. On the 7th of September, there was a lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. And this lunar eclipse took place at 15 degrees of the sign of Pisces. And if you look at the 3i Atlas discovery chart, the midheaven of the chart is at 16 degrees of Pisces. It's 1 degree away from the place of this eclipse. Now, if this happened to a person, you might suspect as an astrologer that there's going to be some kind of change to this person's public reputation or their career or how they're seen in the world at this time. Eclipses bring change. So we had an eclipse on the 7th of September, right on the midheaven of 3i Atlas. How it's seen in the world, you'd wonder, if you'd been looking at this in advance, is something going to change about 3i Atlas on the 7th of September? And yes, something did change about 3i Atlas on the 7th of September, because on that day, because of the lunar eclipse, some astronomers actually took pictures of 3i Atlas and saw that it had changed color. It had changed to a green color. This is an image taken by some amateur astronomers, I believe, of 3i Atlas at the time of that eclipse. And they noticed that it had changed color, which is, again, pretty weird, but comets can change color as they heat up and get closer to the sun and so on and so forth. But I think that's a really interesting demonstration of astrology in action, right? Because you have a chart being erected for this object when it's first discovered, when it first enters human consciousness. You set up the chart, you see there's an eclipse at its midheaven, and the object's image or reputation, let's say, or how it's seen, it changes, which I think is incredibly interesting. Now, something else that's also happened to 3i Atlas since it entered the solar system that I think is also extremely interesting is that it has been blasted by the sun. It's been hit by a coronal mass ejection, a huge eruption from the sun of plasma. And this is pretty weird. As far as I'm aware, we've very rarely seen comets get hit by coronal mass ejections. And this is something that the Angry Astronaut has talked about in this video, which you might want to watch if you find this interesting. It's, according to him, an extremely unlikely thing to happen. It's quite rare for an object as small as that to get hit by the sun. And you almost have to wonder what's going on there. I saw somebody suggesting in the comments that it's almost as if the solar system has an immune system, perhaps, which is reacting to this sort of alien object entering our solar system and our field of consciousness. Or another way to put it is, the sun kind of reaching out to this object and maybe perhaps sensing it or trying to bring it into consciousness or understanding somehow, if you want to get more out there. But very weird and interesting thing to happen. And people are raising some questions about that. What does it tell us about the significance of this object if something so rare happens to it? All right, so let's come to today, October the 3rd. 3i Atlas is making a flyby of the planet Mars. As you can see in this image, it's getting relatively close to Mars, which is pretty incredible, really, for it to pass so close to that planet as it's doing on this day. And we may see some developments on this story because there are satellites that are in orbit around Mars. I believe the European Space Agency has a couple, and they are going to direct these satellites to get images of 3i Atlas. And these hopefully will be better, more detailed images than we've had so far. What are we going to see? Well, I doubt we are going to see a big spaceship. In fact, I'm almost certain we're not. If 3i Atlas is anything weird, if it does harbor alien life of some kind, as some people suspect, or as Avi Loeb seems to be questioning, I think probably this object is still going to look like a big rock of some kind, I would have thought. And let's face it, if it does look like something really weird, I doubt the pictures are going to get released to the public. They'd probably be kept back. I'm almost certain of that. Something else that Avi Loeb has been saying about 3i Atlas concerns the WOW signal. The WOW signal was a radio burst captured in 1977 by Ohio State University's Big Ear radio telescope. And in terms of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, the WOW signal is kind of considered as this one really anomalous signal that was captured and seemed to, or at least some people believe, could have come from some kind of alien civilization or something of that kind, because it was a really powerful burst that almost seemed to be directed towards the Earth, but there was only one of them, and it wasn't repeated. And so it's just generally seen scientifically as this kind of anomalous event. Avi Loeb, however, has been speculating, let's say, that that 3I Atlas actually emitted the wow signal, because both of them came from the same part of the sky. They both came from the galactic center, which is in the constellation of Sagittarius. And Avi Loeb has been proposing the possibility that 3I Atlas was on its way and somehow emitted this radio burst, and then headed over to the Earth. Again, it sounds fantastical and science fiction, and maybe, probably it is. There's the wow signal in a bit more depth, and you can see why it's called the wow signal there. So what is going on? Like, what is Avi Loeb trying to do? Because he's really put himself out there saying a lot of things that nobody else in respectable, quote unquote, science is saying. And there are a lot of speculations out there as to why he would do this, because in the eyes of a lot of his colleagues, he's become a bit of a crank. He's gotten obsessed with this idea, and from their perspective, isn't really approaching the issue as a sober scientist should. And you have to wonder, of course, one of the possibilities, most mundanely, is that this has really boosted his reputation. It's made him very famous. He can sell a lot of books, he can attract funding, he can do all these kind of things, because now he is the famous Avi Loeb, and so that could be an explanation. Of course, he may well genuinely just believe this stuff, but I also think what he's really trying to do is he's trying to shift the Overton window on this issue. The Overton window is the idea that there's basically a kind of limited set of acceptable ideas in discourse at any one time. And over time, the Overton window can shift in one direction or the other, and different ideas can become more acceptable to say. And what Avi Loeb seems to be doing is shifting the Overton window so that it becomes more acceptable to consider the idea that alien spacecraft could be on the way to the solar system, and also in particular that they could be a threat as well. That is something that he has said repeatedly, that this could be a threat to us. And this has also prompted other people to question his motivations. Is this, some kind of national security intelligence operation designed to somehow manipulate us and create fear or things of that kind? Who knows? I think you could see quite easily why it might be in the interests of national security agencies, say, to want to make people more open to something like this, if they, for example, wanted bigger budgets, or even, and I say even, I don't say this is happening, but even if they had some kind of operation planned, which we will also take a quick look at later. So what is 3I Atlas? Well, I don't know what 3I Atlas is from a material perspective in terms of its composition and so forth. I leave that to the astronomers to some extent. However, from an astrologer's perspective, I think 3I Atlas is a symbol, a message. That's how we have to read it. As the Hermetic dictum says, as above, so below. As astrologers, what we're doing is we are reading the signs in the sky to understand what is coming, what is here, and what is coming in the actual world. And I think we have to see 3I Atlas in this respect. And of course, astronomers are saying it's a comet, and comets have a long history of study in astrology. There are rules in astrology for interpreting comets in terms of where they appear, what they look like, what color they are, what shape they are, and so forth. This goes back very far in the history of astrology to, so you see a comet, you see a very notable bright sign in the sky. There are rules to interpreting these things. It's also worth mentioning that historically, comets tended to be seen in negative ways. They were generally seen as bringers of misfortune, war, pestilence, violence, great change in the world, political shifts, and so forth. Generally seen as unfortunate, occasionally not always. They can, according to traditional astrologers, bring good things as well, but generally not. And as you can see in this old woodcut here, there's a comet in the sky bringing misfortune, fire and brimstone to a village here. And just as a recent example, one of the last brightest comets that we saw in the sky was Neowise in 2020. This comet was seen in March of 2020, and I probably don't need to explain to you what was going on then, but it's pretty interesting that there was this very bright, very visible comet at that time, and there was clearly very significant events in the world with an unfortunate flavor. Now, I'm not saying that's what 3i Atlas is necessarily bringing, because it's a bit different to the normal comets and the kind of comets that have been analyzed in the history of astrology, but it's worth knowing that. Now, one of the things that traditional astrologers would look at and place most emphasis on when they were looking at a comet was its perihelion. Its perihelion is when it gets closest to the sun. So comets come from outside, they enter the solar system, and then they kind of slingshot around the sun, and the point where they get closest to the sun is called the perihelion, close to the sun from Greek, and then they hurtle out again. So astrologers would look at the perihelion, and they would even cast charts for the perihelion, and that would be the most significant moment in speaking to what the comet is going to bring. Now, 3i Atlas is making its perihelion on October the 29th, 26 days from now. So this is what its perihelion looks like in the animation we saw before. This is the closest approach it's getting to the sun. You can see it's still going to be outside the orbit of the Earth when it does that. But yes, it's coming on October the 29th. And as I say, traditionally, the perihelion was seen as the most significant moment in the lifespan of a comet. So let's have a look at the astrology of October the 29th. And I've selected a few of the planets here because there is some pretty crazy astrology on October the 29th. I'm not going to lie. There really is a pretty amazing configuration in the sky. And in fact, two configurations happening at once. We have a grand water trine. We have Mars at 25 Scorpio, Saturn at 25 Pisces, Jupiter at 24 Cancer. A grand trine in water, powerful, flowing, emotional energy. And then we also have another configuration. We have Mercury opposing Uranus. Mercury opposing Uranus does look like inspiration, flashes of enlightenment, new ideas, mentally perceiving something very different, unusual, and new. It's quite interesting. And it's also forming what you might have heard me talk a lot about the basket configuration of 2026, which is a configuration of the outer planets, including Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and then Jupiter as well. Well, Mercury is occupying the position of Jupiter. This is a kind of almost a preview of the 2026 astrology here, but with Mercury playing the role of Jupiter. And again, this looks really interesting, transformational astrology. Now, bear in mind that 3i Atlas isn't going to be visible to us at that time. So I'm not sure that we should expect to be seeing anything in Three-Eye Atlas at that time. Who knows? But it seems very unlikely. But it does suggest that that day or around that time, we're going to see some really interesting developments. I just want to give a shout to another astrologer. Rod Chang just recently published a book called Comets in Astrology. If you're interested in the astrology of comets, this book looks and sounds really interesting. I'm going to be getting hold of it myself because I want to learn more about how to interpret comets. So do check that out. And there's a little shout to Rod for his excellent work. Now, let's talk about Oumuamua again quickly, because this is significant to what we're going to be talking about with Three-Eye Atlas. Oumuamua was discovered in October of 2017. And this was a really significant year for other reasons, namely for quote-unquote UFO disclosure, because just about 2 months after Oumuamua was discovered, you had this story appearing on the front of the New York Times, Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program, by Helen Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Keane, who's an astrologer, not an astrologer, reporter who has done a lot of reporting on UFOs. This was a pretty significant story, let's say, because you would never see this kind of story appearing on the front page of the New York Times. A story about UFOs, reporting about a UFO program, quoting Lou Elizondo, a very well-known figure in the UFO scene. And people have raised questions about what this was all about and so forth, but it did represent, I think, a significant moment in that it seemed to represent certainly some faction of people in the military intelligence complex deciding to push out narratives about UFOs for whatever reason. Supposedly there was a program to investigate UFOs. Does seem to have been some kind of I don't want to say front, but like there was some kind of intention to perhaps put some information together and put it out to the public. But this happened quite recently, and we know that military intelligence have been studying this for a very long time. So there are kind of reasons to be a bit sort of suspect about what this truly represented. But I think it's certainly significant. And we started to see the Pentagon releasing videos of UFOs. This is one of the better known videos that was released at that time. And they were putting these videos out saying, we don't know what these things are. Certainly a change to decades and decades of ridicule and denial, and it represents a different approach to this subject, and I think it's pretty significant. And again, it comes 2 months after Oumuamua appears, right? So we have this interstellar object, the first ever one appears, and then immediately afterwards we start to see this more openness about UFOs. So if we think about these kind of things as symbolic, then we have an interstellar object, an object appearing in the sky, not visible to the naked eye, but nevertheless detected, that is symbolic of an opening to the wider cosmos. And then we have this happening. So that's how I would primarily read this. There was some really interesting astrology going on in 2017, though. I want to highlight this because if we go back to 1993, we had the last conjunctions of Uranus and Neptune that year. That's the beginning of a new 170-something year Uranus-Neptune cycle. These conjunctions have and configurations have correlated with spiritual awakenings of different kinds over the years, and a lot of other things as well. Technologies of connectivity. In 1993, of course, this is roughly the time that the World Wide Web went public. Now, something else that happened in 93 had to do with this man, Stephen Greer, who is obviously very well known in the UFO scene. bit of a controversial figure, I would say, but certainly an important one. I think it's undeniable. And in 1993, the very year of these conjunctions, Greer launches the Disclosure Project, which is basically a project to get whistleblowers who've worked in programs related to UFOs in the military and intelligence to talk openly about what they've seen. And this was pretty much a landmark project that comes at the start of this cycle. That's significant, right? That tells me that these themes, probably we are going to see openness, or more openness, let's say, about this subject and awakenings and revelations of so forth. Now, what happens in 2017? Pluto reaches the degree, or roughly the 20th degree of Capricorn, 19th and 20th degrees, that's where the conjunctions took place. Pluto reaches that part of the zodiac. It reaches that degree. We have a slow-moving planet like Pluto reaching the degree of a conjunction. It's like the zodiac has a memory, basically. It triggers the themes of that cycle, the cycle that began at that conjunction. So we have Pluto there triggering this cycle, and then we start to see this kind of disclosure process. What does that tell us? It tells us, I think, that the current Uranus-Neptune cycle is related to UFO disclosure. It's related to more openness on this issue. It's related to expanding consciousness of this issue. And what's happening now? Well, between 2025 and 2027, Uranus and Neptune are going to make a sequence of sextile aspects. Sextile is the 60-degree aspect. It's the first major aspect of their cycle. When planets reach aspects in their cycle, you can expect events related to the themes established at the conjunction. So we have reached the sextile this year, middle of 2025, I think July, we had the first exact one. They're going to be doing this every year between now and 2027. It's really highlighting 25 to 2027 as important years, an important period for this issue. And I think it tells us a lot is going to come out. We're going to become a lot more conscious of this issue. And we already saw how when Pluto triggered this degree, we had Oumuamua and we had this UFO disclosure thing beginning. So we kind of know this is baked into this cycle. And now we're at this first major aspect, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it. Okay, so quick question. Why might this be more than symbolic? Saying that this is symbolic, that's my base case. I'm taking a bit of a conservative line on it. I think it could well be that 3i Atlas comes in and out of the solar system, and in terms of that object in particular, we don't really see anything like more that's very strange, but we certainly could. I think we have to admit that there are possibilities for this, and reasons to think that might happen. Well, we already saw the Uranus-Neptune sextile, right? So we already saw that one cycle is pointing to much more openness on this subject, but there are others. Pluto is now in Aquarius. Pluto has to do with power, but also with revelation. What I've seen in studying previous transits of Pluto through Aquarius is a theme of different civilizations coming face to face with each other and kind of realizing that there are other powers in sharing the planet with them. So for example, the last one, we had the Qing dynasty and the British Empire having their first formal meeting. We had Australian colonists meeting the native people of Australia there. If you go back another cycle, you had the Spanish conquistadors running into the people of Peru, the Incas. So there's this theme of kind of like people appearing from the margins, which is Aquarian, sort of revealing that there are other powers around, other forces, and so to speak. So broadly, in a broad thematic sense, Pluto in Aquarius seems to bring that up. Pluto's in Aquarius now. It's also making a trine with Uranus in Gemini. Uranus's cycle is 84 years long. Last time Uranus was in Gemini was the Second World War. We also saw the emergence of the UFO phenomenon, the modern UFO phenomenon, at that time when Uranus was in Gemini. Uranus being a planet of revelations and upgrades and so forth, and Gemini being this communicative sign that has to do with knowledge. Uranus is back in that sign, and it's making a really close aspect, a tight trine with Pluto in Aquarius. This, to me, looks like information coming out, secrets being revealed, new information being revealed to us, a growth, an upgrade to consciousness, and so forth. And again, we've sort of seen how the theme of encounters with the other also comes up with Pluto. Pluto-Neptune sextile as well. So we also have Pluto and Neptune in a sextile at the same time. So actually Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are in this minor grand trine aspect pattern. Neptune is sextiling both Pluto and Uranus, and Pluto and Uranus are trining each other. So the Neptune-Pluto sextile tells us that we're also seeing activations of the theme of the current Pluto-Neptune cycle. That takes us back to 1891 and 1892 when the last exact conjunctions of these planets took place, but they were in orb of conjunction through the last quarter, let's say, last 20 years of the 19th century. Particularly the 1890s was a really extraordinary decade in history, and I think it's really worth studying because you can study that decade and see the modern world that we live in coming into being with all the technologies of instant communication, radio, flight, cars, all sorts of stuff, cinema. It's all coming into being at that time. And something else that happened at that same time is we have the mystery airship wave of 1896 and 1897, hundreds of sightings of weird airships all over America and beyond. They, according to Jacques Vallée, exhibited a lot of the characteristics of UFOs. They could move really fast. They had strong lights. And this was not technology that was known of at the time. And it absolutely happened because there are too many newspaper reports of these things. You can look in the archives and see them. People were seeing these weird airships all over the place, and then they just kind of disappear. But from a symbolic or sort of archetypal sense, maybe even a direct link, but who knows? This is kind of like a proto-UFO phenomenon. It reflects the same kind of themes. It's rather similar, but a kind of almost 19th century version of it, a kind of steampunk UFO wave. And this is a chart that I've shown quite a bit on my channel. It's from Archetypal Explorer, which allows you to visualize aspects over time. Now, Pluto and Neptune have been in a sextile for about a century, coming on to a century. In the by the time we get to 2040, it'll have been about 100 years. And this shows the two planets coming into orb of sextile in the 1940s. So you can see how something that was promised at the conjunction comes into manifestation, right? We have the mystery airship wave, then we reach the first major aspect, and we have the UFO phenomenon proper coming into being. Now, what we're also seeing is that Pluto and Neptune in the 2000s, 2010s, they kind of moved out of orb around that time of sextile, but they're coming right back into orb of sextile right now. Between 2026 and 2032, they're going to make exact sextiles again every year. Those years are pretty interesting, 2026 to 2032. There's a lot of astrologers and a lot of people in the kind of more broadly the sort of woo space who are highlighting that period as a really transformational period. Some people even say 7 years of tribulation and so forth, taking a kind of biblical apocalyptic view. But it's as if kind of there's some sort of process that's been underway for a century now that is going to come to completion, and I would say a new humanity is coming out of the end of that. But again, this points, I think, to the prominence again of the UFO phenomenon during this period earlier on between about 1950, late 1980s. I think the phenomenon was more prominent in popular culture and discourse. I believe it kind of faded away a little bit in the 2000s. And you start to see articles like, how come nobody gets abducted anymore? And what happened to all the UFOs and so forth? That stuff seems to be coming back. Everybody's talking about this issue. And I think it's because we're reaching this sort of climaxing phase of the Pluto-Neptune sextile. We also have a Saturn-Neptune conjunction underway as well. These conjunctions come roughly every 36 years or so. If we look at previous examples of these conjunctions, we've seen some pretty weird stuff happening. 1917, we have the miracle of Fatima, which Jacques Vallée, famous ufologist, has related to the UFO phenomenon because a big crowd of people at that time saw a shiny object, some people say sun, but something that maybe resembles a UFO kind of flying through the sky, zigzagging, giving out strange colors, all sorts. And of course, this continues to inform discourse and spiritual belief to this day. 1952, this famous incident where saucers were seen over Washington, over the Capitol building, 2 weekends in a row. So we see a lot of activity with the theme of UFOs at these Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. I've also done research that suggests to me that the theme of fallen angels tends to come up, and people who are deep into this subject will also potentially know how those subjects might possibly be related as well. All right, I'm just going to give some reasons to be cautious as well. I think it's important to do that and to not get too carried away into theories that we can't prove. There's this famous conspiracy theory, Project Bluebeam, written by a Canadian writer called Serge Monast, who basically said that there was a big plot to create a fake alien invasion and unite everybody in one world religion. And one of the things about this that people find suspicious is that Serge Monast died quite soon after writing this book. So, of course, people wonder, well, was he bumped off because he revealed the truth? Personally, and I've said this before, I think if you look at the details of Project Bluebeam, which involve kind of holographic projections in the sky and brainwave manipulation and all these kind of things, it just seems too fantastical to me. It just seems too sci-fi. And I just find it unlikely, personally. I don't really buy it, but that's not to say that some of those technologies don't exist or might not be used, or that something of this kind that's maybe a bit less fantastical could actually happen. Who knows? We have to bear that in mind. I'm highlighting here Werner von Braun, the paperclip scientist who was brought to the US after World War II, had an assistant named Carol Rosen, and apparently he told Carol Rosen that the, let's say, military-industrial complex, or whatever you want to call it, would use a series of deceptions to create the need for big sort of national security systems, totalitarian government, and so forth. And these would include the threat of the Russians and terrorists and asteroids. And he said the last one would be the alien threat. It's worth keeping that in mind. I'm going to play a clip here from Jeremy Corbell. This is from about 8 months ago. Jeremy Corbell is well known in the UFO scene. He's released quite a lot of videos. He does investigations. He's a video guy, I guess. Works with George Knapp, another famous UFO guy. But this is worth watching, this clip of Corbell speaking about 8 months ago in a show about UFOs. Just have a listen to this.
So UFOs are real, and they've been here a long time, and that's the truth. But the lie is coming. All indications like all of them, is that that lie is going to be that there is a craft slowly making its way to us here on earth. And that is the lie they're going to want you to believe.
So you might agree with me that that is pretty weird in the current context where we have Three-Eye Atlas slowly making its way through the solar system. Not even that slowly, though, to be fair, but there are quite a lot of resonances. And he said that 8 months ago, well before Three-Eye Atlas was discovered. It's interesting, let's just say that. The question you might ask, but why? Like, why say, if Three-Eye Atlas is that particular operation, scam, whatever you want to call it, surely the lie is going to be exposed quite quickly. You know, if this object just flies in and out of the solar system, if it's a lie, if it's not anything significant, then what has it gained, quote unquote, then? Well, you might say this is maybe an information gathering exercise in that they're able to gather a lot of information about how we react to this idea, how people think about it, how alarmed do people get, who amplifies it, who doesn't, and so forth. You know, maybe if you were going to try and do something of this kind, you might want to gather a lot of information in advance of doing it so that you could be sure of how it was going to go down. Just a possibility. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but I think it's worth just keeping a range of possibilities in mind. Something else that's been coming out in the UFO scene, though, is there's a lot of talk of 2027 and essentially the implication that there's a UFO invasion on the way in 2027 that people with clearances know about and aren't allowed to talk about. Recently, Ross Coulthart, an Australian journalist who has done a lot of investigations into UFOs, has been repeating this story about 2027 and how there's this invasion coming, they can't tell us, blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't think I believe it. A lot of people are skeptical, but you know, who knows? Like, we have to hold different possibilities in mind. I think it's worth being prepared mentally for different things that could come, but also being prepared for nothing to happen as well. You know, remember the harmonic convergence, remember 2012, et cetera, et cetera. People often get really excited about such things and then nothing happens and have to go back to everyday life. Now, I do think we're living in extraordinary times. I do think we're getting much more openness and awareness of things like UFOs and whatever they may be. And I do think 2027 is an important year. This is where it gets a little bit weird. Earlier on, we saw Pluto reaching the degree of the Uranus-Neptune conjunctions in 2017. We saw Oumuamua, and we saw this disclosure process beginning. Well, in 2027, 2028, around that time, Uranus is reaching the degree of the Pluto-Neptune conjunctions of 1891 and 1892. So Uranus's 84-year cycle reaches this degree every 84 years, but it's going to be reaching this degree and unleashing in a Uranian, surprising, fast-acting, revelatory way the themes of this cycle. And as we've already seen, Pluto-Neptune cycle does have to do with the UFO phenomenon. So that tells me that there's a lot sort of in the post, and I'm like certain there's going to be tons more coming out about this stuff between now and 2027. 2027 in particular is going to be a really big year. What happened the last time Uranus reached this part of the zodiac? Well, it did that in 1943 and 1944, around that time, towards the end of the Second World War. This is basically when the UFO phenomenon emerges with all the sightings of so-called Foo Fighters during World War II. These strange lights in the sky that are supposedly seen by both Allied and Axis pilots. This kind of early manifestation of the UFO phenomenon, which as the 1940s go on, obviously becomes much more prominent and changes form a little bit. So we've seen Uranus gets to this point in the zodiac, and we see a lot come out about this subject. It's coming again, 2027. And then there are other factors that just say this whole period is going to be big. Just to come back to where we started, this whole sort of apocalyptic feeling, the end is nigh, that's in the air right now. And people are seeing the world in this way from a lot of different perspectives, whether it's from a really wild kind of three-eye atlas, is the aliens coming to kind of raise us to another level or whatever, or whether it's from a much more mundane World War III is coming and we're all going to die, kind of that kind of thing. This narrative is being spun from a lot of different corners in a lot of different ways, but it reflects the general psychic conditions of the time, I think. And I think I would put this down to, astrologically, Neptune being right at the end and start of the zodiac at the moment. Neptune is transitioning from the last sign of the zodiac, Pisces, into the first sign, Aries. It's reached the end of the story, the end of the cycle. The idea of the end, right, is what's being sewn into the popular imagination. Neptune is about the popular imagination, where people are, what people are considering ideal, but also where their imagination is going, cultural trends. I suspect that a lot of it is that we have Neptune, also Saturn as well, so that adds extra heaviness to this. But we have these planets right at the sort of last degree of Pisces. Neptune will be returning to that degree later this month. And I think this is one of the reasons why you can see these kind of ideas of like, this is the end being in the story. In a sense, this is the end. It's an end of a cycle and the beginning of a new one. Last time Neptune made this transition, 1861, 1862, there was some really dramatic cycle-ending events happening. We had the American Civil War beginning, Abraham Lincoln's election here. In China, we had the Taiping Rebellion, which led to an enormous civil war that killed like maybe 20 to 30 million people. Unbelievably terrible civil war in China. And it was led by a guy who claimed to be the brother of Jesus Christ. So there were some weird sort of religious themes mixed in with this, and almost eschatological themes. He thought he was, bringing about the rebirth of China. And I think we see that a lot right now. We are at a sort of place of rebirth. We maybe are going to go through some turbulent times. I don't think it's the end of the world. This is just to come back to the Pluto-Neptune sextile chart that we already looked at. Again, as I said before, we're coming to this very last part of this long sextile. It's like the end of a long process of consciousness, growth, and development. And the last time this happened, in the 1540s, Copernicus's heliocentric theory was published. This was kind of the end of a long process of intellectual growth and development. Also the beginning, right? Because so much developed from there and was built off the back of that reconfiguration of conception of the cosmos. But this was something that happened the last time that Pluto and Neptune are doing what they did now. It was a moment where humanity had to realize that the planet that we were sitting on was not the center of the cosmos, that the Earth was revolving around the sun. So there was a decentering of humanity. And I suspect that's what we are going through in the next few years. A decentering of humanity, but in a different way. A decentering that causes us to realize we're not the only intelligent beings in the cosmos. Now, I'm sure most people watching this already know that very well, but I think there's going to be a wider awakening to that reality, and even fusty old materialist science is going to have to reckon with that. So it's the end of a world, not the world. that's what I've got for you right now. I'm going to answer some questions that people, members of World Astrology Report, have submitted to me. They submitted them in the forum, so if you are interested in becoming a member, you get all the usual benefits that I'm sure you've heard me talk about before, but also when I do these streams, I'm going to take questions from members. So the first question I'm going to look at here is from member Denise Carlson. She says, I am new to astrology, so my apologies if my wording is incorrect. Stefan Burns, his video with Pam Gregory, has mentioned that on October the 21st, there is an interesting alignment between the Sun, New Moon, Earth, and 3i. Is there anything significant about that date that aligns with history and this alignment? Pam and Stefan also mentioned that Edgar Cayce had predicted a blade of light on October the 29th, 2025 would appear. Anything significant about that day as well? Stefan says it's on the heels of the perihelion of 3i. Any thoughts or insights about those days? Okay, thanks for your question, Denise. So Pam and Stefan did this video about 3i Atlas recently, and on the question of the October the 21st date, Stefan looks at things often from a different perspective. He's looking at sort of the geometry of different objects in the solar system, including the Earth, and not necessarily from a astrological Earth-centered perspective, although he does use astrology and look at it from that perspective as well. But I think what he may have been looking at there is some other kind of planetary geometry that we don't necessarily see with our standard tools of astrology. You know, I had a look at the astrology of that particular day. There is a really nice new moon on that day, and I highlighted that in my recent forecast. There's a lovely new moon coming, a lot of benefic influence, 28 Libra, sharing Libra with Libra's ruler Venus and the square with Jupiter. And there's also a quite powerful grand water trine again, with Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in Cancer, Mercury, Mars in Scorpio. So yeah, I don't know if this speaks to the kind of themes that we've been talking about here with 3i Atlas, but who knows, maybe. I think this is quite nice astrology, good new beginnings as it pertains to relations with others, Libra themes. I'm not sure I want to take that too much further and say that tells us what's going to happen with 3i Atlas on that day. But you mentioned the perihelion, and I do think the perihelion astrology on the 29th of October is really powerful and interesting. I'm not aware of that Edgar Cayce prediction, the prediction of the blade of light. Edgar Cayce has made some really interesting, correct predictions about things that were going to come. For example, you know, the discovery of the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, where around the time when he said that Atlantis would be rising from the sea, and various others. So, you know, Casey's definitely somebody to pay attention to. I find his readings really interesting. He has made some wrong predictions as well, as almost everybody has. So my personal approach is to not take any one particular source or seer or prophet or anyone really as infallible, just to take them all as data sources. If it's true that he did predict a blade of light on October the 29th, that's very interesting. I think with the Mercury-Uranus opposition, which does look to me like surprising new intellectual discoveries and so forth. Yeah, it's really interesting astrology that day. Definitely one to pay attention to. Let's see what happens. Okay, Janine Carpentier says, assuming the butterfly effect applies universally, how will 3i Atlas, I guess that's meant to say, affect humans and or society? So I think I've already answered that to some extent in this presentation. My base case is that it's symbolic of widening human consciousness and understanding of our place in the cosmos and who we share it with. That's how I'm reading it. Beyond that, I'm not sure if it will have any direct effects. I think it's symbolic. Now, more may happen. Maybe some of these wilder ideas will turn out to be true. I don't know, but I'm going to go with my base case. And yeah, if you're thinking about the idea of the butterfly effect, which is that some very small events can have huge consequences for the world, then I think all of these kind of things are feeding into transforming human consciousness at this time. And there's a lot of small, constant developments that are shaping our psyches in ways that we may not be aware of. I think this big transformational astrology is it's shaping all of us at the same time as it's changing the world. It's hard sometimes, unless you're very well practiced at observing your own consciousness, to know how you're changing with it. But I think we all are, as we gain new insight into the world and how it works and how it could be in the coming years. Thanks, Janine. Okay, I have a question from Danny Pachetti, who says, remote viewers are seeing a plasma-type electric energetic discharge from the sun associated with 3i Atlas. Is there anything from an astrological point of view that would corroborate sudden electrical discharge Uranus-Sun? So thanks for that, Danny. I haven't seen anything too significant of that kind astrologically, but I would answer this more by referring to the coronal mass ejection, which I already mentioned earlier. Right, so the sun spat out this big flare, this coronal mass ejection, and which incredibly hit 3i Atlas. This has, I believe, already happened. I think the CME has already hit 3i Atlas. It maybe is still in transit, but I believe it already has. And a lot of people have already talked about that. And that's a remarkable event. And I suspect that maybe that's what the remote viewers have picked up on. If they did this blind and they did it in advance of this period, then maybe they saw that this thing was going to be hit by this kind of reaching out by the sun, and that a lot of people would be talking about it and then become conscious of it. So I believe that's probably what they saw, Danny. Thanks for that. Now, Brian Winchell, who says, if I'm not mistaken, the first planet 3i Atlas will pass closely is Mars, and that will happen sometime in the next few days. Thus, I think looking at how Mars is showing up in the chart could be instructive. We know Mars is in one of its home abodes, Scorpio, so it is powerful. Since it is in Scorpio, perhaps we should consider the symbolic meaning of Scorpio to understand 3i Atlas's arrival in our near solar system. Mars also rules Aries, and Neptune currently sits at 0 Aries, one of the major power points of the zodiac. Thus, Neptunian significations should be considered. And considering that we're coming up on the Saturn-Neptune-Aries conjunction at that same 0 Aries point, it seems 3i Atlas is tied to this major event in some way. One concept I'm considering about Neptune in Aries is the fog of war. It makes me wonder whether 3i Atlas could be tied to things like false disclosure, Project Bluebeam, etc. That's not a specific question here, just a general one. Do you have any thoughts after considering all of this, Dan? Thanks for all that, Brian. Interesting thoughts on this here. So as you've seen in the presentation, yeah, I've already kind of considered how this could be linked to such things as false disclosure, Project Bluebeam, and so forth. I think it's symbolic of disclosure. And I think simultaneously we may see what you could call false disclosure, as well as actual raising of awareness and consciousness about the issue. I think anything that's put out about this issue, for example, the 2017 disclosure process, it still causes people to become interested in this subject. It causes people to research it, and when you do that, you realize it's a complex, multifaceted issue that has a lot to do with consciousness and who we are and our place in the world, and it leads generally fairly inevitably towards spiritual questions as well. So I don't know if you can do a false disclosure that doesn't ultimately lead to a real disclosure, is what I would say about that. And yes, 3i Atlas could be part of that story. It's symbolic of it, and perhaps it's even being used to gather information about how we respond to ideas like, oh, there's a big alien craft coming towards us. On the question of Scorpio, that's an interesting perspective. I've certainly seen the Plutonic themes related to this, which obviously in modern astrology, astrologers hold Pluto to rule Scorpio. And there does seem to be something around things surfacing from the depths, and maybe forcing us to become aware of what is lurking beneath the surface. Whether that's in a spiritual sense or whether that's in the sense of the powers and principalities that rule the world. I think those themes do seem to be tied with this, Brian. And I arrive at that with the Mercury opposition to Pluto in the Discovery chart, but you can get there in different ways. So thanks for that, Brian. That's the astrology of October the 29th. Once again, Mars in Scorpio there. Mercury opposing Uranus, looking like enlightenment of some kind. I have another question, came via email from John Benson. What are the actual facts about 3i Atlas at the moment? I don't know what to believe. Do you have sources you trust? Yeah, so I did mention those at the start of the presentation, John. So Anton Petrov, for a very scientific perspective, just the facts in a very kind of textbook fashion. Stefan Burns, who I think blends the spiritual and the scientific together in a really interesting and useful and important way. And the Angry Astronaut to get the lowdown on the kind of Avi Loeb perspective as well. All right, so there we go. That is it for the presentation today. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody who joined the stream. I will have a look at your comments afterwards. It's a little bit difficult for me to do that at the same time as I am talking, but I will take a look and see what you said. And I appreciate you for joining me. And I am going to wish you all well and peace